price of salvation. English version, cold. That was the first thing Clara felt every morning for 10 years. The penetrating, merciless cold of the cellar that gnawed at her bones and left her shivering beneath a thin, musty blanket. But on this December morning, the cold felt different. This was not the cold of the cellar. It was the chill of a luxurious bathroom, where Irene forced her to bathe, scrubbing her skin so hard it was as if she wanted to scour away every trace of years of suffering. "Wash yourself properly, you useless cow," her stepmother hissed, pouring another jug of ice-cold water over Clara's head. Clara gritted her teeth to keep from screaming. She had learned not to scream. Screams only made things worse. They need to see you clean. Nobody will pay for a dirty whore. Whore. The word hit Clara like a slap, though she should have been used to it. Irene had called her that for years. Useless. Ugly. A burden. And now, merchandise. Clara didn't understand everything that was happening. 3 days ago, her father and Irene started acting strangely. Nervous, but with a certain excitement. Stanley drank even more than usual, his small, sweaty face red from whiskey, and the disgusting triumph smoldered in his rat-like eyes. Irene whispered into the phone, using words Clara couldn't fully grasp. Auction? Contract? Southport. 300,000. Yesterday, Irene came down to the cellar with a new grey dress. Long, straight, without any embellishments. "Put this on," she ordered. "And don't you dare get it dirty. We're leaving tomorrow." Leaving. Clara hadn't left that house in 10 years, not counting the 3 times her father had to take her to the emergency room, because the bleeding was so severe that even he became afraid. But then, they always told her to lie. "I fell down the stairs," she repeated to the nurses, while Stanley stood behind her with his menacing look that said, "If you tell the truth, I will kill you when we get back home." Now Irene pulled her out of the tub and threw a towel at her. "Wipe yourself off. You have 5 minutes to get dressed, and cover up those disgusting scars. They need to see you from the front, not the back." Clara dressed with trembling hands. Her left hand, the one with fingers that never healed properly after Stanley crushed them with the cellar door 5 years ago, moved stiffly. She put on the grey dress. The fabric was coarse, uncomfortable, but it was clean. That was a kind of change. She looked at herself in the old cracked bathroom mirror. She saw a stranger. Her long blonde hair had been sharply cut to her shoulders by Irene last night. "Because you look homeless," and now fell around her pale face. Her eyes, once bright and full of dreams, were now grey and empty. The scar on her temple, a memento from when Stanley hit her with a bottle 7 years ago, was partly hidden by her bangs. "Come on!" Irene screamed from the hallway. Clara stepped out hunching, her shoulders, taught by instinct to make herself as small as possible, as unnoticeable as possible. Stanley waited by the front door, wearing a dirty coat that reeked of cigarettes and alcohol. He smiled when he saw Clara, that hideous, malicious smile. "Well, look at that. Our little Clara finally looks human. Maybe we'll get more than we thought." "Shut up and come on," Irene snapped, grabbing Clara's arm so hard that her fingernails dug into the skin. "We have a 4-hour drive." They got into Stanley's old Ford. Clara was shoved into the back seat, between boxes of trash and empty bottles. The entire way to Southport, no one spoke to her. Stanley drove, muttering under his breath, and Irene smoked cigarette after cigarette, tossing them out the open window, letting in the freezing December air. Clara tried to understand where they were taking her. She tried to gather her thoughts, but her mind was so tired, so worn out by years of isolation and abuse, that she couldn't think clearly. Perhaps it was a mental hospital. Irene had threatened this for years. If you try to run away one more time, We'll lock you up in a hospital. We'll say you're crazy. And no one will believe you. No one had believed her when she tried to run away at 18. The police had given her back to Stanley. That night, she spent 3 days tied up in the cellar, without water, while Stanley came down every few hours to make sure she learned her lesson. She had learned. She learned there was no escape, that the outside world didn't believe people like her, that she was alone. The car stopped. Clara raised her head and saw a huge villa through the window, white, modern, with large glass windows and a garden full of expensive sculptures. It wasn't a hospital. It was something worse. "We're getting out," Stanley said, turning off the engine. "And you, Clara, not a word. Understand? Not one word, or you'll go back to the cellar and stay there forever." Irene opened the door and pulled Clara out. Clara's legs staggered. She hadn't walked normally in weeks, having spent most of her time in the cellar. The cold air from the sea hit her face. Southport. She was by the sea. She could hear the waves. They entered the villa through a side entrance. The hallway was luxurious. Marble floor, gold sconces on the walls, huge paintings. Clara had never seen anything so wealthy. Stanley and Irene walked ahead, leading her deeper into the building until they reached a wide staircase leading down to the cellar. Clara's heart beat faster. The cellar again. Always the cellar. But when they went downstairs, she saw that it wasn't a typical cellar. It was a large hall, elegant, with dark paneling on the walls, subdued lighting, and rows of chairs set up in front of a small stage. On the stage stood 10 women, young, frightened, dressed in simple dresses like Clara. "Wait here," a man in a suit said, pointing to an empty spot on the stage. Stanley shoved Clara toward it. "Go. And remember, not a word." Clara walked onto the stage and stood between 2 other women. One of them, a brunette, barely 25, whispered, "What's happening? Why are they keeping us here?" But a guard, a tall man in black, immediately walked over and hit her with an open hand. Silence. Clara froze. She knew this feeling. She knew the rules. Don't speak. Don't look. Just survive. The door at the end of the hall opened and men began to enter. Rich men, in expensive suits with watches on, their wrists that cost more than Stanley's entire house. They sat down in the chairs, talking softly, drinking whiskey from glasses served by waiters. "Gentlemen, welcome to today's exclusive auction," a voice said over the speakers. The host, a man in a sleek, stylish suit, walked onto the stage. "Today, we have 10 unique offers for you. Young, healthy, ready to work as domestic help or other services. Each of these women has signed a 5-year contract. Everything is legal, gentlemen. Everything is discreet. Legal." Clara hadn't signed any contract. But of course, Stanley and Irene had forged her signature. They always did. The first woman was called to the front of the stage. Number 1, Catherine, 23 years old, high school education, healthy. The bidding started at $100,000. Within 2 minutes, the price rose to $300,000. Sold. Clara watched as one woman after another was sold. Some were crying. Others stood motionless like her, too terrified to move. Finally, it was her turn. Number 8, Clara, 28 years old. The host hesitated, looking at a note. High school education, experience in domestic work, starting price, $300,000. Silence. Clara stood with her head down, staring at her feet. She felt the men's gaze on her, judging, weighing, rejecting. 250. Someone in the back of the hall tossed out, without enthusiasm. 250 once? The host began. "She's too skinny," someone else shouted. "She looks sick." The host looked at Stanley and Irene, sitting in the back row. Stanley shrugged. Irene narrowed her eyes. "We're lowering the price to 150,000, the host said, clearly irritated. Silence. Clara felt something break inside her. Even here, even as merchandise, she was worthless. And then she heard a voice. Deep, calm, but with something sharp in its tone. 200,000. Everyone looked toward the voice. Clara also looked up, instinctively, despite the fear. In the last row, at the very end, sat a man. Tall. Even sitting down, it was clear he was tall. Silver hair at his temples. Blue eyes that looked directly at her. Not with lust, not with contempt. With something else. Maybe compassion? 200,000 once. Twice. The host was clearly pleased. Sold. Clara didn't remember how she got off the stage. Everything became blurred. Stanley and Irene walked up to the tall man, smiling. Widely, disgustingly, as if they were car salesmen. The man handed them an envelope, probably full of money. Then he turned to Clara. "Come with me," he said softly. Stanley grabbed Clara's arm and whispered in her ear, "Be good. This is your last chance." Last chance. Last chance for what? To survive? To escape? To die? Clara followed the tall man. They left the villa into the cold December evening. A black Mercedes stood outside the villa. New, shiny. The man opened the door for her. "Please, get in." Clara hesitated. What if this was worse than Stanley and Irene? What if this man was even more cruel? But what could she do? Run away? To where? She had no money, no documents, no strength. She got into the car. The interior was warm, soft leather seats, the smell of a new car. The man got in on the other side and drove away. They drove in silence for 20 minutes. Clara stared at her hands, the scarred ones, with the badly healed fingers of her left hand. She tried to breathe. She tried not to faint. "My name is Damon Smith," the man finally said. His voice was gentle but firm. "I'm a lawyer, and I want you to know what those people did to you is a crime. You are not my maid. You are not my property. You are a free woman." Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. The words were stuck in her throat. "I'm taking you to my apartment in Washington," Damon continued. "You'll have your own room. You'll be safe. And then we'll talk. Is that okay?" Okay. When was the last time? Something was okay? Washington appeared before them like a picture from another world. Lights, traffic, life. Damon parked under a luxury building downtown and led Clara to the elevator. They rode up to the 9th floor. The apartment door opened onto a spacious modern living room with large windows overlooking the city skyline. Clara stood in the doorway, afraid to enter. It was all too beautiful, too clean, too normal. "Please come in," Damon said gently. "This is your home now." Home. She hadn't had a home in 20 years. Clara walked in slowly, looking around. A white sofa, a wooden table, a bookshelf full of books. Everything was tidy, elegant, warm. "I'll show you your room," Damon said. He led her down the hallway to a bright room with a large bed, a desk, and its own bathroom. "This is for you. You can lock yourself in from the inside if you want. You have complete privacy." Clara stood in the middle of the room, still disbelieving. A bed, a real bed, with clean sheets, with a duvet. "I made you hot tea," Damon said. "It's in the kitchen when you're ready. And if you want to bathe," he pointed to the bathroom, "there are fresh towels and everything you need." Then he left her alone. Clara stood in the silence of her new room. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt. Slowly she walked to the bed and sat on the edge. The mattress was soft, not the hard concrete floor of the cellar, not the damp, musty blankets, just warmth and softness. Tears began to flow. Silently, relentlessly, Clara cried for the first time in years, not from pain, but from something she couldn't name. Relief? Fear? Disbelief? After a long time, she got up and went to the bathroom. She turned on the shower. Hot water. Real hot water. Not an icy stream from a bucket. She took off the grey dress, that disgusting dress she had been sold in, and stepped under the shower. The water was so hot it scalded, but Clara didn't pull back. She wanted to feel that warmth. She wanted to wash it all away. The dirt, the blood, the years. She stood under the shower until the water began to cool. Then, trembling, she wrapped herself in a soft white towel. A bathrobe hung on the hook, fluffy, blue. Damon must have put it there for her. She put it on. It was too big, but warm. She left the room. Damon was sitting in the living room, reading something on his laptop. He looked up when he heard her. "Do you feel better?" he asked. Clara nodded. She couldn't speak. Damon stood up and walked to the kitchen. "I made you tea and sandwiches. I don't know if you're hungry, but..." "Thank you," Clara whispered. They were the first words she had spoken to him. She sat down at the table and took the cup of tea. The warmth spread through her hands. Damon sat across from her, but maintained a distance. He didn't want to scare her. "Clara," he began carefully, "I know what you've been through. I can't even imagine it. But I want you to know, you are safe. Now, no one will hurt you. Not me. Not them. Never again." Clara looked at him. Those blue eyes were sincere. Maybe he was a good liar. Maybe it was a trap. But for the first time in 10 years, someone was looking at her like a human being. Why did you buy me?" she asked softly. Damon sighed. "I was there to gather evidence. I want to bring that organization down. But when I saw you, something broke inside me. I couldn't let anyone else take you. I couldn't leave you there. They'll say I'm crazy," Clara whispered. "They always said that I'm lying, that I'm a problem." Damon leaned slightly forward. "Clara, if you let me help, if you tell me the truth about what they did to you, I promise I will destroy them, everyone who hurt you, but only when you're ready. You don't have to talk today. You can rest. You can feel safe." Safe. Clara hadn't felt safe in 20 years. But that night, in the soft bed, in the warm room, with the door closed, she fell asleep. For the first time in a decade, she fell asleep without the fear of Stanley coming down to the cellar to hit her. Without the cold, without the hunger, she fell asleep like a human being. The next morning, Clara woke up disoriented. For a moment, she thought she was in the cellar. But then she felt the softness of the mattress, saw the sunlight streaming through the curtains. The truth returned like a wave. It wasn't a dream. She got up slowly and left the room. Damon was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. "Good morning," he said, smiling slightly. "Sleep well?" Clara nodded. "Yes, thank you. I have pancakes, scrambled eggs, fruit. You can eat whatever you want." Clara sat down at the table. Food. Real food. Not bread crusts and rotten vegetables that Stanley and Irene threw to her in the cellar. She ate slowly, cautiously, as if afraid it would disappear. Damon watched her quietly, his face serious. "Clara," he finally said, "I have to ask you something, and you can refuse to answer. But did they beat you?" Clara froze. The fork fell from her hand. Damon stood up and moved closer, but not too close. "Yesterday, when you were in the bathrobe, I saw..." "God, Clara, you're back." Clara felt tears well up in her eyes. She lowered her head. Please don't look." No, Damon said quickly. "I'm not judging you, never. But who did this to you? Those people, your parents." Clara trembled. Everything in her told her to remain silent. Silent, just as Stanley had taught her. But the words began to flow out on their own. "My father and my stepmother, they've been hitting me for 12 years, she whispered. "Every day. If I did something wrong, if I looked wrong, they locked me in the cellar. Sometimes for days, without food, without light." Damon turned pale. His jaw clenched. "God, it was Irene. She poured boiling water on my hand." Clara lifted her left hand, showing the scars. "Because I didn't clean the floor well. And my father, he broke my fingers with the cellar door because I tried to run away. Clara. Damon sat across from her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't name. Anger? Sadness? Have you ever seen a doctor? Did anyone know? I went to the emergency room 3 times, but they told me to lie. I fell down the stairs, and they always paid in cash, so there wouldn't be any documentation. Damon stood up abruptly. He started pacing the kitchen, rubbing his face with his hands. This is torture. This is human trafficking. Clara, they have to go to prison. They'll say I'm crazy. Clara repeated, her voice breaking. The police didn't believe me once. When I was 18, I tried to run away, but they had witnesses, neighbors they paid, and the police gave me back. Damon stopped and looked at her. Fire burned in his eyes. Clara, listen to me carefully. I'm the best criminal lawyer in Washington. I won't let them hurt you. Not this time. I promise you. On my wife's grave, I will destroy them. Everyone who hurt you. Clara looked at him through her tears. Why? Why are you helping me? Damon sat down again, his voice softer. Because when I was a child, I watched my father beat my mother every day, and I couldn't do anything. I was too small, too weak. But now, his voice hardened. Now I'm strong. I have money. I have power. And I swore to myself that I would never let a woman suffer in my presence. They sat in silence for a long moment. Clara wept silently. Damon handed her tissues. What now? She finally asked. Now, Damon said. You're going to start recovering. I'll get you a therapist, a doctor. We'll buy you new clothes. And then, when you're ready, we'll file a lawsuit against them. Criminal, civil, everything. Clara nodded, not fully trusting the words but wanting to believe them. At that moment, Damon's phone rang. He looked at the screen and frowned. Excuse me, I have to take this. He went out to the living room. Clara heard his voice, sharp, professional. Yes, speaking. What? Who's calling? Jack Wolf? What does that crook want? Silence. A lawsuit? About what? Damon raised his voice. Unlawful confinement of a mentally ill person? That's absurd. Stanley and Irene Baker? Of course. Those idiots. Clara felt her heart sink. They were starting. Already. Damon returned to the kitchen, his face hard as stone. Clara, your parents just filed a lawsuit against me. They claim you're mentally ill and that I'm unlawfully confining you. Clara stood up abruptly, her chair tipping over. I knew it. I knew they'd do that. Are you going to hand me over? Are you? No, Damon said firmly, grabbing her shoulders, gently but surely. Never. Do you hear me? I will never give you back to them. I've been fighting in court for 20 years, and I always win. His eyes looked straight into hers. Clara, they just made the biggest mistake of their lives, because now I have a reason to destroy them. And in that moment, despite the fear, despite the tears, despite the years of suffering, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years. Hope. A week. Only a week had passed since the auction, but for Clara, it was an eternity. 7 days where she woke up every morning in a clean bed, in a warm room, without fear. 7 days where she ate real meals, not scraps, not rotten food, but fresh fruit, warm soups, bread straight from the bakery. Damon cooked for her every day, sometimes with the help of a cook who came 3 times a week. An older, kindly woman named Mrs. Sophia, who never asked about Clara's scars, but always left an extra serving of dessert for the girl who needs to gain strength. But despite those 7 days of peace, Clara was still afraid. She was afraid of every loud noise. When Damon slammed the door, her heart jumped. She was afraid to sleep too long. 4 years. Stanley woke her up at 5 in the morning with a kick, shouting that she was lazy. She was afraid to eat too much, For years, she only got scraps, and when she tried to steal something from the kitchen, Irene locked her in the cellar for 2 days. Even now, with a full fridge, Clara ate in small bites, always leaving half on her plate, as if afraid the food would run out. Damon noticed. He noticed everything. On the 3rd day, he brought a doctor to the apartment. Dr. Anna Collins, A. Specialist in trauma and domestic violence. Clara was frightened at first. Doctors had always been part of the nightmares. Those 3 emergency room visits where she had to lie. But Dr. Collins was different. She spoke softly, calmly, never touching Clara without asking permission. The examination lasted 2 hours. Dr. Collins photographed every scar, every burn, every badly healed fracture. She took notes in a thick notebook. When she reached Clara's back, the crisscrossing whipping scars, the doctor stopped writing for a moment. Clara could hear Dr. Collins sigh quietly, as if holding back tears. "Clara," the doctor finally said, closing the notebook, "these wounds, some are years old, some are fresh, from the last few months. That means the torture lasted a long time, a very long time." Clara nodded, not looking up. "I want you to know," Dr. Collins continued, placing a hand, very gently, on Clara's shoulder, "that what they did to you is the most serious crime I know. And as a doctor, I will testify in every court, in every proceeding, to make sure those people are punished." After the doctor left, Damon came into Clara's room. He held a binder in his hand, thick, black, full of documents. "This is the medical report," he said, sitting next to her on the sofa, but keeping his distance. "Dr. Collins documented every wound, every scar. These are undeniable proofs, Clara. In court, no one will be able to say you're lying." Clara looked at the binder. So thick, so much pain contained in paper. "But they have a lawyer," she whispered. "I heard you talking on the phone. That Jack Wolf." Damon smiled coldly. "Jack Wolf is a third-rate crook who defends the worst criminals because no decent client would hire him. I already know his tactics. He'll try to portray you as mentally ill, unreliable, but he has one problem." "What?" Clara asked. "I'm better," Damon said simply. "Much better." That night, for the first time, Clara didn't cry herself to sleep. Instead, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what Damon had said. "I'm better." Those 3 words sounded like a promise, like an oath. The next day, Damon hired a private investigator, Christopher White, a former FBI agent, now the best investigator in the country. White came to the apartment, a tall, bald man in a leather jacket with a briefcase full of equipment. He shook Damon's hand, then turned to Clara. "Miss Clara," he said, his voice stern but not unfriendly, "I'm going to need every detail from you, every date, every incident. I know it will be painful, but the more you tell me, the better I can help." Clara spent the whole day talking. White recorded everything on a tape recorder, taking notes. He asked for details. What tools Stanley and Irene used to beat her, in which rooms it happened. Were there witnesses? Clara remembered almost everything. A brain that survived by recording every day, every humiliation. After 5 hours, White turned off the tape recorder. "That's enough for today," he said, "but I already have an idea where to start digging." "Where?" Damon asked. "The death of Clara's mother," White replied. "Miss Clara mentioned that her mother died suddenly. A heart attack, but there was no autopsy. Stanley arranged for cremation in 3 days. That's suspicious. Very suspicious." Clara froze. "You think they—" "I don't know yet," White interrupted, "but I intend to find out." The following days brought an avalanche of information. White worked fast, ruthlessly. He found Mrs. Helen, a neighbor of Stanley and Irene, an older woman who lived 3 houses down. Mrs. Helen agreed to meet with White at a cafe, away from the house. White recorded her testimony. "I saw them beat that girl," Mrs. Helen said, her voice trembling. "I saw through the fence as Stanley dragged her by the hair to the cellar. I heard screams for years, but I was afraid to say anything. Stanley threatened to burn down my house if I went to the police. And Irene, that woman has the eyes of a devil. When Damon showed Clara the recording, Clara cried. She knew all those years, and she didn't help. She was terrified," Damon said softly. "Just like you. But now she's talking. And that's a witness, Clara, the first of many." White also found something else. Hospital bills. Clara's 3 emergency room visits, all paid for in cash by Stanley, without official documentation. But the hospital kept copies, admission numbers, times, descriptions of injuries, broken ribs, second-degree burn on the forearm, possible concussion. "This is gold," Damon said, studying the documents. "Each of these visits proves the violence, and the fact that they paid in cash and avoided documentation proves criminal intent." But the biggest discovery came a week later. White tracked down the family doctor of Ann Baker, Clara's mother. Dr. Mark Brown, already retired, agreed to meet. When White asked about Ann's death, Dr. Brown turned pale. "It always bothered me," the old doctor said. "Ann came to me a week before her death. She complained of strange symptoms, vomiting, dizziness, tremors. I suspected it might be poisoning. I wanted to order blood tests, but Stanley refused. He said, 'It's just the flu.' A week later, Ann was dead. Stanley immediately arranged for cremation. I wanted to report it to the prosecutor's office, but I was young, afraid. Stanley had connections with the local mafia, so I kept silent." White recorded every word. When Damon heard the recording, his face hardened. He looked at Clara, who was sitting next to him in the living room, and said softly, "Clara, they didn't just torture you. They probably murdered your mother." Clara covered her face with her hands. All those years, she thought her mother died of a heart attack, that it was a natural death. But now she was finding out that Stanley and Irene might have poisoned her. They took her mother. They took her life. They took everything. "I will destroy them," Damon said, his voice like ice. "I promise you, Clara, I will destroy them completely." Meanwhile, Stanley and Irene weren't sitting idly by. Jack Wolfe, their lawyer, started a smear campaign against Clara. He filed an official lawsuit in the district court, claiming that Clara was mentally ill, with a history of delusions and aggressive behavior. He presented witnesses, the same neighbors Stanley paid years ago to lie to the police. Wolfe also sent a letter to the press. One of the tabloids, Shock News, published an article, "Rich Lawyer Kidnapped Sick Woman. Family Fights for Her Return." When Clara saw the article, she fainted. Damon found her on the living room floor, trembling, in shock. He called Dr. Collins, who gave Clara tranquilizers. "They're winning again," Clara whispered through her tears. "They always win. The newspapers will believe them. People will think I'm crazy." "No," Damon said firmly, kneeling beside her, holding her trembling hand. "Listen to me, Clara. This is their last desperate attempt, and I'm about to answer." The next day, Damon called a press conference. 20 journalists from serious newspapers, television, radio, gathered in the conference room of his law firm. Damon stood behind the lectern, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his blue eyes full of icy calm. "Good morning. My name is Damon Smith, and I am Clara Baker's lawyer. I read yesterday's article in Shock News, and I want to say clearly, they are lies. Clara Baker is not mentally ill. Clara Baker is a victim of 10 years of systematic torture by her own parents." The room exploded with questions. Damon raised his hand. "I have the evidence. medical documentation, witness statements, hospital bills. Today, I am handing copies of these materials to the prosecutor's office, filing an official criminal lawsuit against Stanley and Irene Baker for kidnapping, torture, human trafficking, and suspected murder. Murder. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Murder? One of the journalists shouted. Whose? Anne Baker, Clara's mother, who died suspiciously 20 years ago without an autopsy under circumstances suggesting poisoning. We have the testimony of her doctor at the time. The next day, all the newspapers were talking about Clara, but this time, in her defense. Victim of 10-year torture fights for justice. Lawyer reveals shocking evidence of domestic violence. Did parents poison their wife and torture their daughter? Stanley and Irene were summoned for questioning at the prosecutor's office. White found out from his contacts in the police that both of them broke down during questioning. Stanley tried to blame Irene. Irene tried to blame Stanley. Their lawyer, Wolf, tried to salvage something, but it was too late. The prosecutor's office ordered their arrest. Damon gave Clara the news that evening as they sat together in the living room, drinking tea. Clara listened in silence, her eyes filling with tears, not of sadness, but of disbelief. They are in prison, she whispered. Temporarily arrested, Damon confirmed. They can't come near you. They can't hurt you. Never again. Clara broke down. She cried loudly, shamelessly, allowing herself the full range of emotion for the first time. Damon sat next to her on the sofa and hugged her, cautiously, asking for permission with his eyes. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, crying into his suit jacket. Thank you, she whispered between sobs. Thank you. No one ever defended me. Damon stroked her hair, gently, like a father stroking a child. You deserve it, he said softly. You deserve safety, happiness, life. That night was a turning point. For the first time in weeks, Clara fell asleep without nightmares. And when she woke up in the morning, she saw that Damon had left a note on her door. Breakfast is waiting in the kitchen. You are free, Clara. Truly free. But freedom is not just the absence of a prison. It's also rebuilding. In the following weeks, Clara started therapy with a psychologist, Dr. Mary Wilson, a specialist in PTSD. The sessions were tough. Clara had to talk about every incident, every humiliation, every beating. She had to learn to name what had happened. Not accidents, not punishments, torture, violence, slavery. Dr. Wilson also taught her something new, that it wasn't her fault, that she wasn't a problem, a burden, useless, that she was a victim. Clara, Dr. Wilson said during one session, for all those years, Stanley and Irene programmed you to believe you were nothing, that you deserved the pain. But that's a lie. You were an intelligent, sensitive girl who had dreams. And you are still that person. Dreams. Clara had almost forgotten she once had dreams. She wanted to study medicine. She wanted to help people. She wanted to live. One evening, sitting with Damon on the apartment terrace, looking at the illuminated panorama of Washington, Clara said quietly, I want to finish school. I want to go to college. Damon looked at her, smiling. You can. We'll enroll you in a preparatory course. We'll find the best teachers. And then, medicine, if that's what you want. But it costs money, Clara began. Damon interrupted her, placing his hand on hers. Clara, I have money, lots of money, and there is nothing that would give me more joy than to see you in a hospital gown, saving lives. This is your dream. It's time to fulfill it. Clara looked at him, at this tall, strong man who pulled her out of hell, and felt something new. Not just gratitude, not just respect. Something warmer, something deeper. Love? She didn't dare name it. Not yet. She was too broken, too afraid. But maybe, someday. Damon also felt something. Clara saw it in his eyes when he looked at her. It wasn't lust, no, never. It was something purer. Care, protection, perhaps love too. But both remained silent. Both knew that time had to heal the wounds before anything could happen. Meanwhile, the court case gained momentum. The prosecutor's office, led by prosecutor Paul Stone, a distinguished older man known for his ruthlessness towards abusers, officially charged Stanley and Irene with kidnapping and unlawful deprivation of liberty, torture, human trafficking, participation in a criminal trafficking group, suspected murder of Ann Baker. In total, possible sentences from 25 years to life. Jack Wolfe, the lawyer for Stanley and Irene, tried to fight back. He filed a motion for a psychiatric evaluation of Clara, claiming she was unreliable, but Prosecutor Stone rejected the motion, presenting the reports from Dr. Collins and Dr. Wilson, both of whom confirmed that Clara was fully conscious, reliable, and that her injuries were undeniable evidence of violence. The trial was set for March 2025, 2 months away. But then something happened that no one expected. One February afternoon, as Clara was returning from a UA therapy session with Dr. Wilson, Damon always hired a driver for her. He never let her walk alone for safety. She noticed someone watching her. A man, tall in a black jacket, with a hood covering his face. He stood across the street, staring at her. Clara froze. Her heart beat faster. Was it someone sent by Stanley? Irene? They had mafia connections after all. White had mentioned it. The driver, Mark, a 40-year-old former police officer, whom Damon had specifically hired, noticed immediately. "Miss Clara, please get in the car quickly." Clara got in. Mark drove off abruptly, but the man in the black jacket jumped onto a motorcycle and started following them. "We have a tail," Mark said calmly, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel. He reached for his phone and called Damon. "Boss, we have a problem. Someone is following Miss Clara." For the next 10 minutes, Mark tried to lose the motorcycle, but the rider was persistent. Finally, Mark turned around and drove straight to Damon's law firm, a building with security, cameras, and safety protocols. When they arrived, Damon was already waiting downstairs with 2 bodyguards. The man on the motorcycle stopped several yards away, watching. Then he drove off. Damon led Clara inside, his face pale with anger. "Who was it? Did you see him before?" "No," Clara whispered, trembling. "But he was looking at me, like he wanted to." Damon immediately called White. The detective arrived in half an hour with a laptop and tracking equipment. "I'll show you something," White said, opening the laptop. A photo appeared on the screen, taken by city cameras. The man on the motorcycle, face partially visible. "Do you recognize him?" White asked. Clara stared at the photo, and then she froze. It's Greg Miller," she whispered. "My father's colleague, from the old gambling mafia. It's him. My father owed him money." White and Damon exchanged glances. "This is not a coincidence," White said. "Stanley and Irene are in jail, but they have outside contacts. They probably sent Miller to intimidate you. Or worse." "Worse?" Clara paled. Damon sat next to her, taking her hands in his. "Clara, listen to me. I won't let anything happen to you. From this moment on, you will have round-the-clock protection. You will not leave the apartment alone. You will not go anywhere without protection. Understand?" Clara nodded, but the fear returned. That old familiar fear she thought had disappeared. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing every sound, every creak, every rustle. At 3 a.m, she got up and went to the living room. Damon was there. He was sitting on the sofa, working on his laptop. When he saw Clara, he immediately closed the laptop. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. Clara nodded. "I'm scared." she whispered. I'm scared that he will come here. Damon stood up and walked over to her. Clara, we have the best security system in Washington. The doors are armored. The windows are bulletproof. Security is downstairs 24 hours. No one will get in here. But what if... Clara started crying. What if they win? What if the court believes them? What if I go back to the cellar? Damon hugged her, tightly, firmly. Never, he said, his voice like an oath. You will never go back to the cellar. You will never go back to them. They have to get through me first. Clara rested her head on his chest, listening to the beating of his heart. Strong, certain, safe. Damon, she whispered, using his first name without sir. Why are you helping me so much? Damon stroked her hair. He was silent for a long moment, and then he said softly, because when I saw you at that auction, I saw something in your eyes that I knew. I saw my mother. She was beaten too, for years, by my father, and I couldn't save her. I was too young, but you, I could save you, and I can't. Stop thinking that maybe God sent me there. Maybe it was a sign that I can fix something. Clara raised her head and looked at him. There were tears in his blue eyes. You're not just my client, Clara, Damon said softly. You are someone important to me. Very important. Their faces were close. Very close. Clara could feel his breath. Warm, gentle. But Damon pulled back. I'm sorry, he said quickly. That was wrong. You need time. You need to heal. And I shouldn't. No. Clara interrupted him, grabbing his hand. Don't apologize. I feel something too. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to name it. But thank you for everything. Damon squeezed her hand. Once I win this case, he said, smiling slightly, when Stanley and Irene are in prison forever, then we'll talk. About the future. About what could be between us. Okay? Clara nodded, smiling too, for the first time in weeks. But the happiness was short-lived. The next morning, White called, Damon with news that changed everything. Damon, the detective said, his voice tense. We need to talk. Immediately. It concerns Stanley and Irene. Something's happened. Damon put the phone on speaker so Clara could listen. What happened? He asked. Stanley and Irene. They're out of jail. Silence. What? Damon shouted. How is that possible? Their lawyer, Wolf, filed an appeal for conditional release, arguing they are elderly, sick, and pose no threat. And the judge, probably, bribed, agreed. They were released last night. Clara felt the world spin. They're free? She whispered. Only temporarily, White said. The trial will still take place, but until then, they are free. Damon closed his eyes, trying to stay calm. Where are they now? I don't know, White admitted. They disappeared. They're not at home. They haven't answered their phones. But Damon, if they sent Miller after Clara, that means that they still want to destroy her. Damon. Finished. And then Damon's phone rang. An unknown number. Damon answered, putting it on speaker. Hello, he said. The voice on the other end was drunk, hoarse, familiar. A voice Clara knew too well. Damon Smith, right? Stanley said, his words slurred. You think you won? You think you stole my daughter, and you'll get away with it? Damon clenched his jaw. Stanley, you're drunk. Hang up and go back to your lawyer. No, Stanley screamed. Listen to me. Clara is mine. Mine. I fed her for 28 years. And if you think you're going to take my money, my compensation, my house, you're wrong. That's not your money, Damon said icily. That's compensation for Clara, for everything you did to her. Stanley laughed, a disgusting, drunken laugh. You'll see who wins in court, little lawyer. I have witnesses, I have documents, and most importantly, I have Clara, because she knows that if she tells the truth in court, if she dares to speak against me, I'll find her, no matter where she hides. I'll find her, and this time I'll lock her in the cellar forever." Clara screamed. She couldn't stop herself. She screamed until her throat hurt. Damon hung up and hugged her, but Clara was hysterical. "They're coming for me! They're coming! No," Damon said, holding her tightly. "They won't come. I promise. I won't allow it." But they both knew this was war, and the most critical battle was about to begin. March came with rain, cold, relentless rain that drummed against the windows of Damon's apartment, as if the heavens themselves were weeping over what was about to happen. Clara stood by the large living room window, looking at the grey sky over Washington, feeling her heart beat faster and faster. It was Monday, March 11th, 2025, the day she both feared and longed for, the day of the trial. In 3 hours, she was to stand in the Washington District Court, courtroom number 3, across from the people who destroyed her life, across from Stanley and Irene. And she was going to tell the truth, out loud, before the judges, before the world. She was going to stop being a victim in the shadows. She was going to become a witness. She was going to win. But the fear was paralyzing. "Clara," she heard Damon's voice behind her. She turned around. He stood in the living room doorway, already dressed in his trial suit, dark blue, perfectly tailored, with a white shirt and a burgundy tie. He looked like a general preparing for battle. The determination blazing in his blue eyes made Clara feel both safe and terrified. "Ready?" he asked softly, walking toward her. "No," Clara whispered, her hands shaking. "I'm not ready. I'll never be ready." Damon stood in front of her and took her hands, the scarred ones, with the badly healed fingers, in his strong, certain hands. "Clara, listen to me. In the last 2 months, we've prepared everything. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every document. This is not a fair fight. This is an execution. Stanley and Irene have no chance." "But what if the judge believes them?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. "What if he says I'm crazy, that I made it all up? What if—" "You didn't make it up," Damon interrupted her firmly. "You have scars. You have medical documentation. You have witnesses. Clara, the truth is on your side, and I am on your side. And today, the whole court will see who Stanley and Irene Baker truly are. They will see the monsters." Clara looked at him, at this man who pulled her out of hell, who gave her a new life, who became more than just a protector. He became her anchor, her hope, maybe even, though she was still afraid to admit it, her love. "Good," she whispered. "I'll do it. For you, for Mom, for me." Damon smiled, that rare, warm smile that was reserved only for her. "For you," he repeated. "Always for you." An hour later, they were sitting in the black Mercedes, driven by Mark, the driver bodyguard. Behind them drove a second car, with White, the detective, and 2 additional bodyguards. Damon wasn't taking any chances. After the phone call from Stanley, after Stanley and Irene were released from temporary arrest, Damon doubled the security measures. Clara didn't leave the apartment without an escort. She didn't even go to the bathroom alone at night. She always left the door ajar, afraid of the darkness, afraid that Stanley would somehow break in, kidnap her, and lock her in the cellar again. The nightmare hadn't ended. It had only changed form. When they arrived at the courthouse, they saw a crowd. Journalists, dozens of journalists, with cameras, microphones, notebooks. Clara's story had become a sensation. Newspapers had been writing about her for weeks. Victim of a decade of torture fights for justice. Will a rich lawyer defeat the system? The trial that will shake the nation. Mark stopped the car at the side entrance, away from the cameras. Damon got out first, then helped Clara. She was dressed in a simple navy dress, bought by Damon a week ago, with long sleeves to cover the scars. Her hair was pinned up in a simple bun. No makeup. Damon insisted, the court must see the real you, not a mask, the truth. They entered the building through security. The courthouse corridors were cold, sterile, with high ceilings and an echo to every step. Clara felt her heart pounding. Every breath was an effort. Damon, she whispered, stopping. I can't breathe. Damon immediately turned. Around, placing his hands on her shoulders. Clara, look at me. Only at me. Breathe with me. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Clara tried. She tried to synchronize her breath with his voice. Slowly, very slowly, the panic began to subside. Better? Damon asked. Clara nodded, though she was still trembling. Good. Now we go. Together. They reached courtroom number 3. The large oak doors were closed. Prosecutor Paul Stone stood in front of them, the older man who was leading the prosecution against Stanley and Irene. He shook Damon's hand. Everything is ready, the prosecutor said. We have a full room, media, audience. The whole country will be watching. Damon nodded. And them? Stanley and Irene are already inside, with Wolf. They look nervous. Good, Damon said coldly. They should be scared. The doors opened. The courtroom was huge. High ceilings, rows of benches filled with people. Journalists, observers, anti-domestic violence activists. At the front, behind a large wooden table, sat the judges. 3 of them. Presiding Judge Andrew Stone, an older man with grey hair and a stern face, and 2 jurors. And on the left side, at the defendant's table, sat them, Stanley and Irene Baker. Clara saw them and froze. She hadn't seen their faces for 2 months. But now, there they were. Stanley in a cheap wrinkled suit, his small sweaty face red, his rat-like eyes avoiding her gaze. Irene in a black dress, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her cold, narrow eyes staring straight at Clara with a hatred so intense that Clara felt physical pain. Next to them sat Jack Wolf, their lawyer, a short, balding man in glasses with a briefcase full of documents, looking nervous. Damon led Clara to the plaintiff's table. They sat next to Prosecutor Stone. Clara tried not to look at Stanley and Irene, but she felt their eyes on her. She felt their presence, as if the air in the room had thickened. Please rise, the bailiff said. Everyone stood up. Could he? Judges took their seats. Washington District Court, Courtroom 3, case number 4783-2025. The prosecution of Stanley and Irene Baker for kidnapping, torture, human trafficking, and suspected murder, announced the presiding Judge Stone. His voice was deep, authoritative. Do the defendants understand the charges? Wolf stood up. Yes, Your Honor. The defendants understand the charges and plead not guilty. Plead not guilty. Of course. Clara clenched her fists. Of course they would lie until the end. Very well, Judge Stone said. Prosecutor Stone, you may begin. The prosecutor stood up, opening his brief. He was a tall, thin man with a confident and calm voice. Your Honor, distinguished jurors, today I will present to you a story that will shake your conscience. The story of Clara Baker, a woman who was imprisoned, tortured and sold as merchandise by her own parents for 10 years. The room went silent. Every word of the prosecutor was like a hammer hitting the silence. Clara? Baker was 18 years old when she tried to run away from home. She had dreams. She wanted to study medicine. She wanted to live. But her father, Stanley Baker, and her stepmother, Irene Baker, had other plans. They tied her up. They locked her in the cellar. And for the next 10 years, they systematically tortured her. The prosecutor opened the first binder. I have here the medical documentation prepared by Dr. Anna Collins, a forensic medicine specialist. Clara Baker has 87 scars on her body. 87. Each one is a trace of a burn, a blow, a whipping. The prosecutor showed pictures on the large screen. A collective gasp went through the room. Clara closed her eyes. She didn't want to look. She didn't want to see her destroyed body displayed for the whole world. Please note, the prosecutor continued, pointing to the screen. These scars on the victim's back, they are marks from whipping. They cross each other. Some are up to 8 inches long. These were not accidents. This was violence. Systematic. Planned. Stanley tried to say something, but Wolf grabbed his arm, silencing him. And this, the prosecutor showed another photo, is a second-degree burn on the victim's forearm. According to the expert opinion, caused by contact with boiling water for a minimum of 15 seconds. Irene Baker poured boiling water on her stepdaughter for improperly cleaning the floor. Irene clenched her jaw, but didn't speak. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, closing the binder, this is not a case about a difficult family. This is a case about torture, about slavery, about human trafficking. Stanley and Irene Baker sold their own daughter at an illegal auction in Southport for $200,000. I have the audio recording from that auction provided by the organizer, who is currently in custody. The prosecutor played the recording. The voice of the auctioneer flowed from the speakers. Number 8, Clara, 28 years. Old. Starting price? 300,000. Then silence. 250. And finally, Damon's voice. 200,000. The room was in total silence. The only sound was the drumming rain against the windows. This is a crime, the prosecutor concluded, and I demand the maximum sentence. He sat down. Judge Stone nodded. Defense? Jack Wolf stood up, nervously adjusting his glasses. Your Honor, the defense maintains that the situation is more complicated than the prosecution presents. Clara Baker has a history of mental health problems. I do not, Clara shouted, standing up abruptly. Damon placed his hand on her shoulder, calming her. Judge Stone looked sternly. Miss Baker, please remain calm. You will have the opportunity to testify. Clara sat down, trembling. Damon whispered in her ear, calm down. He's trying to provoke you. Don't give him the satisfaction. Wolf continued. Clara Baker was difficult as a teenager, aggressive. She tried to run away from home at the age of 18. My clients, Stanley and Irene, had to seek psychiatric help. That's a lie, Damon shouted, standing up. Your Honor, this is manipulation. Clara Baker tried to run away because she was beaten, and Stanley and Irene bribed witnesses to portray her as mentally ill. Judge Stone hammered the gavel. Silence! Counselor Smith, please sit down. You will have your turn. Damon sat down, but his eyes were blazing with anger. Wolf finished his. Defense, weak, full of holes, but he tried. He claimed that Stanley and Irene did what they could for Clara, that the auction was a mistake, that they just wanted to pay off debts. Every word was so absurd that half the room shook their heads in disbelief. The defense concludes, Wolf said, sitting down. Very well, Judge Stone said. Now we will hear the witnesses. Prosecutor Stone, I call Clara Baker. The prosecutor said. This was the moment Clara had been waiting for and dreading for 2 months. She stood up. Her legs were shaking. Damon squeezed her hand, a final gesture of support, and let go. Clara walked to the witness stand. Every step was an effort. She passed the defendant's table. Stanley was looking at the floor. Irene looked straight at her, with hatred, with contempt, as if to say, you wouldn't dare. You don't have the courage. But Clara did have the courage. She did, because Damon had given her strength. She did, because her mother, her real mother, Anne, was watching her from heaven. She did, because she deserved justice. She sat down on the witness stand. The bailiff handed her the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth? I swear, Clara said, her voice quiet but clear. Prosecutor Stone moved closer. Miss Clara, please tell the court, what happened when you were 18? Clara took a deep breath, and then she began to speak. When I was 18, I was accepted to medical school. It was my dream. I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to help people. But my father and stepmother burned my documents. They said I was too stupid for college, that I should serve the family. Her voice trembled, but she continued. I tried to run away. I went to the police. I begged for help. But they paid the neighbors to lie. They told the police I was crazy, and the police gave me back. What happened when you returned home? The prosecutor asked. Clara closed her eyes. My father tied me up in the cellar. He left me there for 3 days, without water, without food, without light. I said I was sorry. I begged, but he just laughed. Several people in the room were crying. A journalist in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. And for the next 10 years? The prosecutor continued. For the next 10 years, I was their prisoner. I slept in the cellar. I ate scraps. I cleaned. I cooked. I washed. And if I did something wrong, they beat me. How often did they beat you? Clara opened, her eyes looking straight at Stanley. His rat-like eyes finally looked at her, full of fear. Every day, Clara said. Every single day. The room erupted in whispers. Judge Stone hammered the gavel. Silence! The prosecutor showed the pictures. Miss Clara, can you describe how these scars were made? Clara looked at the screen. She saw her back, covered in scars. That's my father. He beat me with a belt. When I was naughty. When I spilled water. When I didn't kneel fast enough. For everything. And this? The prosecutor showed the burns on her forearm. That's Irene. She poured boiling water on me because I didn't clean the floor well. Do you remember, Irene? I screamed. I begged. And you just laughed. Irene clenched her fists but remained silent. Miss Clara, the prosecutor said softly, did they ever love you? Did they ever treat you like a daughter? Clara started crying. No, never. I was merchandise to them. A burden. Something to be used and sold. The silence in the room was deafening. Thank you, the prosecutor said. I have no further questions. Now it was Wolf's turn. Stanley and Irene's lawyer stood up, nervously flipping through his notes. He walked up to Clara. Miss Baker, he began, is it true that as a teenager you had an explosive temper? Clara looked at him. I had the right to be afraid. I had the right to try to run away. But the police returned you to your parents, Wolf continued. Doesn't that mean the police found no evidence of abuse? It means, Damon interrupted, standing up, that Stanley and Irene bribed witnesses. Your Honor, I have the evidence. Judge Stone nodded. Counselor Smith, please present the evidence. Damon walked to the table, pulling out a document. This is the testimony of Mr. Henry Carter, one of the witnesses who testified against Clara 18 years ago. Mr. Carter, currently on his deathbed in the hospital, confessed to Detective White that Stanley Baker paid him $10,000 to lie. Here is the sworn and notarized testimony. The room erupted. Wolf paled. Stanley jumped to his feet. That's a lie. That's a fake. The judge hammered the gavel. Mr. Baker, please sit down. Damon continued ruthlessly. Your Honor, that's not all. I also have Stanley Baker's bank records, showing a $10,000 cash withdrawal exactly 1 day before Mr. Carter's testimony. Coincidence? I think not. Wolf tried to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. Does the defense have any further questions for the witness? Judge Stone asked, looking sternly at Wolf. No, Your Honor, Wolf stammered. In that case, the witness may step down. Clara returned to her seat. She was exhausted, But she also felt something new. Relief. She had told the truth. The whole world had heard. For the next 2 hours, the prosecutor called other witnesses. Dr. Anna Collins described every one of Clara's wounds in detail, speaking about the years of abuse. Detective White presented the evidence, recordings, documents, bills. Mrs. Helen, the neighbor, testified that she had heard Clara's screams for years. Dr. Mark Brown, Clara's mother's retired doctor, spoke about Anne's suspicious symptoms before her death. Every witness was a nail in Stanley and Irene's coffin. And then, the climax. "I call Stanley Baker," the prosecutor said. Stanley stood up, his small, sweaty face red. He walked to the witness stand with a shaky step. It was clear he had been drinking. Even now, in court, he reeked of whiskey. "Mr. Stanley Baker," the prosecutor began, "do you admit to beating your daughter?" "No," Stanley said, but his voice was weak. "No?" The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "Then how do you explain those scars on her body?" She hurt herself," Stanley stammered. "She was crazy. Self-inflicted." "Self-inflicted," the prosecutor interrupted. "Are you saying that a 27-year-old woman whipped her own back? You yourself here. How absurd." "That sounds, don't you?" Stanley was silent, sweating. "Or perhaps you can explain this." The prosecutor showed the audio recording from the auction. The auctioneer's voice? Clara, 28 years old. Starting price, $300,000. "You sold your daughter," the prosecutor said icily. "For money, like property, like a slave." "It wasn't like that," Stanley screamed. We needed the money. We had debts." "So you admit it." Stanley realized what he had said. He turned pale. "I have no further questions," the prosecutor said, smiling coldly. Next was Irene. Clara's stepmother walked to the witness stand, like an ice queen, with her head held high, contempt in her eyes. But when she sat down, even she couldn't hide her nervousness. "Mrs. Irene Baker," the prosecutor began, "did you pour boiling water on your stepdaughter?" "It was an accident," Irene replied coldly. "An accident?" The prosecutor showed a picture of the burn. "This burn covers 20% of the victim's forearm. Experts say it was caused by contact with boiling water for a minimum of 15 seconds. How long does an accident that lasts 15 seconds take?" Irene clenched her jaw. "You hated Clara, didn't you?" The prosecutor continued. "You hated her from the first day you married Stanley. You saw her as a rival." "That's absurd," Irene snarled. "Really?" The prosecutor pulled out another document. "I have here the testimony of your sister, Jane Smith, who says, and I quote, 'Irene always said Clara was a mistake of nature, that she should have died with her mother. Is that true?' Irene paled. "My sister is lying." "Really? Or are you lying?" The prosecutor leaned closer. "You tortured this girl for 10 years. You locked her in the cellar. You poured boiling water on her. You organized this auction. It was all you." Irene was silent, her cold eyes full of hatred. "I have no further questions," the prosecutor concluded. Judge Stone looked at the clock. It was 6 in the evening. "The court will recess. We will resume tomorrow at 9 in the morning for closing arguments." Everyone stood up. Clara felt as if she had just run a marathon. She walked out of the courtroom with Damon, who put his arm around her, guiding her through the crowd of journalists shouting questions. "Miss Clara, do you feel justly treated? Do you think your father will go to prison? Is it true you plan to marry Counselor Smith?" Clara didn't answer. Damon led her to the car, where Mark was waiting. They got into the Mercedes and drove away. On the way to the apartment, Clara cried, but this time not out of fear, from relief, from exhaustion, from hope. "You did well," Damon said softly, holding her hand. "You were incredible." They looked scared," Clara whispered. "They are," Damon replied. They know they lost. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, reliving the day. Every word, every look. At 3 a.m, she got up and went to the living room. Damon was there, as always. He was working on his laptop, preparing his closing argument. "You're awake?" he asked, looking up. "I can't be," Clara admitted, sitting next to him on the sofa. "I'm thinking about tomorrow, about the verdict." Damon closed the laptop. "Clara, I want to tell you something. Something important." She looked at him, her heart beating faster. "When I first saw you at that auction," Damon said, his voice quiet but certain, "something broke inside me. I couldn't stop thinking about you. For the past 3 months, I've watched you rebuild yourself, watched you regain your strength. And I fell in love with you." Clara froze. "Damon, I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "I know you need time. I know that after all this, I'm not sure if you can love someone. But I wanted you to know, you are not a client to me. You are not a project. You are the woman I love. And when this trial is over, when you are ready, I'd like us to try. Together." Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks. She looked at this man, her savior, her protector, her friend, and she realized she felt something too. Not just gratitude, something more. I love you too," she whispered. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe the first day you gave me hot tea. Maybe when you held my hand in court. But I love you, and I'm terrified of this feeling, because everyone I've loved hurt me." Damon took her face in his hands. "I will never hurt you. I swear. On everything I have. Never." And he kissed her, gently, cautiously, like kissing broken porcelain that needs to be glued back together very slowly. Clara responded to the kiss, her hands clenching his shirt. For the first time in her life, she felt safe in a man's embrace. For the first time, she felt love without pain. The next day, they returned to court. The room was even more packed than yesterday. Everyone wanted to hear the closing arguments and the verdict. First was the defense's argument. Jack Wolfe stood up, trying to save what he could. He argued that Stanley and Irene are not monsters, that they loved Clara in their own way, that the situation was complicated. Every argument was weaker than the last. When he finished, half the room made no secret of their hostility. Then it was Prosecutor Stone's turn. "Your Honor, distinguished jurors," he began, standing in the middle of the room. "For the past 2 days, you have heard a story that should shock all of us. The story of a woman who was stolen, not by a stranger, but by her own father, who was tortured, not by an enemy, but by her own family, who was sold, not in a foreign market, but by the people who should have protected her." The prosecutor paused, looking at Stanley and Irene. Stanley and Irene Baker are not people, they are monsters, and they deserve the maximum penalty. Silence. "I request 25 years of imprisonment for Stanley Baker, 22 years for Irene Baker, and the confiscation of all their assets for the benefit of the victim." The prosecutor sat down. "And now, Damon." Damon Smith stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked to the center of the room, his blue eyes looking straight at the judges, and he began to speak. "Your Honor, I have been a lawyer for 20 years. I have defended the innocent. I have prosecuted the guilty. But never, never have I encountered a case so obvious, so unambiguous as this one." His voice was calm, but full of force. Clara Baker was 10 years old when she lost her mother. She was a child, a defenseless, frightened child, and instead of receiving love, she received hell. For 18 years, Damon took a step closer to the defendant's table, looking straight at Stanley. "You, Stanley Baker, are a father biologically, but you have never been a father in any other sense. A father protects, a father loves. You tortured." Stanley lowered his gaze. Damon turned to Irene. "And you, Irene Baker, you hated an innocent child. You hated her. for existing. And for 20 years, you destroyed her, physically and mentally. Irene was silent, but her hands trembled. Damon turned back to the judges. Your Honor, today we have a chance to send a clear signal. A signal that in this nation, we do not tolerate violence. We do not tolerate torture. We do not tolerate slavery. And that every victim, no matter how long they have suffered, deserves justice. He paused one last time. I request the maximum sentence. And I request that all of Stanley and Irene Baker's assets be transferred to Clara. It is the least we can do. Damon sat down. The room was silent. Even the journalists stopped writing. Judge Stone nodded. The court will adjourn for deliberation. The verdict will be announced in 2 hours. 2 hours. The 2 longest hours of Clara's life. They waited in a small witness room. Clara paced back and forth, unable to sit still. Damon held her hand, trying to calm her. White brought coffee. Prosecutor Stone sat in the corner, reviewing documents. At 6 p.m, the bailiff knocked on the door. The court is returning. The verdict will be announced. They returned to the courtroom. Clara's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it would explode. She sat next to Damon, squeezing his hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. The judges entered. Everyone stood up. Please be seated, Judge Stone said. His face was stern, unreadable. In the matter of case number 4783-2025, the prosecution of Stanley and Irene Baker, the judge began. The court has reached the following decision. The silence was unbearable. After reviewing all the evidence, witness testimonies and medical expert opinions, the court finds the defendants guilty of all charges: kidnapping, torture, human trafficking, and complicity in the death of Ann Baker. Stanley collapsed. Irene clenched her jaw. Stanley Baker, the judge continued, is hereby sentenced to 25 years of imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Stanley screamed, "No, this is not..." Silence! The judge hammered the gavel. Irene Baker is hereby sentenced to 22 years of imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Irene didn't scream. She just stared straight ahead, her cold eyes empty. Additionally, the judge said, all assets of the defendants, the house, savings, valued at approximately $800,000, are hereby transferred to Clara Baker as compensation for the damages incurred. The room exploded. Journalists shouted. People applauded. Clara began to cry, loudly, shamelessly, crying tears of happiness for the first time in her life. Damon hugged her, pressing her against his chest. "You won," he whispered. "You won, Clara." "We won," she corrected him through her tears. "Together." Stanley and Irene were escorted out by the police in handcuffs. Stanley screamed, cursed, blamed everyone. Irene walked in silence, turning back only once to throw Clara one last, hate-filled look. But Clara wasn't afraid. Not this time, because she knew they would never hurt her again. September brought golden leaves and warm sunshine. Clara stood on the terrace of Damon's apartment, their apartment now, looking at the Washington skyline. In her hand, she held a letter from the University School of Medicine. "Dear Miss Clara Baker, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the first year of medical studies." Accepted. She had fulfilled her dream. After 10 years of hell, she was studying medicine. "Are you reading it for the 100th time?" She heard Damon's voice behind her. She turned around, smiling. "The 101st, she admitted. Damon walked up and embraced her from behind. "I'm proud of you," he whispered, kissing her neck. Clara leaned against him, feeling safety and warmth. A ring sparkled on her finger, a diamond worth $500,000. Damon had proposed in August by the sea in Southport, this time at a beautiful hotel. with a view of the sunset, not an auction hall. The wedding was planned for spring. "How do you feel about the first day?" Damon asked. "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but happy. For the first time in my life. Happy." Stanley and Irene were rotting in prison. Clara learned from White that Stanley had been beaten by other inmates. Those who found out what he had done to his daughter had no mercy. Irene was isolated after trying to attack a guard. Both still had 20 years to serve. Justice was sweet. And Clara? Clara was living, truly living. She was studying. She was loving. She was laughing. Her scars hadn't disappeared. They were still on her body, on her soul, but she no longer hid them. They were proof that she had survived, that she had won. "I love you," she said softly, turning in Damon's arms. "I love you too," he replied, kissing her, this time not cautiously, but surely, with passion. And somewhere high above, Ann Baker, Clara's real mother, was smiling. Her child was free. Her child was happy, and that was true justice, true love, true salvation.